he left Kojak.
I mentioned Kojak in our last week's coverage just because I was like, I love Kojak. This is great. And then they're like, oh yeah, we can't take him on motorcycles, so we're just gonna ditch him in the woods and he'll take care of himself or whatever. I'm like, they left their dog behind.
Yeah, like, what the fuck? You get a backpack, you figure out a way to like take that dog with you. I don't know what you got to do, but you get a sidecar for your motorcycle. You find a way. Welcome, friends, to episode 168 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm Luke.
And I'm James.
And this week we discuss the middle third of Stephen King's 1978 novel, The Stand. All right, here we are, James, with the middle section, the book 2, which is, I think, the largest of the three. A lot happens in this section. We kind of theorized a little bit last week. You theorized on what you thought might be going down as the story progressed. And I'm curious to know, like, what actually happened lined up with what your expectations were. Were you pleasantly surprised, or did things not live up to you? What you were expecting?
I think in some ways I was correct, and then in other ways I was not at all. I felt like the natural progression of a story like this would be for all these main characters to get together and to see them bounce off each other. And in that way, I think I kind of said that I assumed that would happen, but where they left us at the end of book 1, they were all traveling in totally different directions. So I didn't really see how that could be possible, or how it would at least have taken a long time, which it kind of did. I have like 2 things to talk about here. This has got to be the most we've ever read in 1 week for the podcast before, I think. I'm pretty sure, because even with it, we split it up into 5 different sections of book. So I'm pretty sure in terms of like word count, this was the longest, and it was
I think, didn't we read all of like Hunt for Red October in 1 week though? So
how much was it? Yeah, I guess
it might have been a little more, but yeah, this was a lot. It was a lot.
This was a lot, and something else I've always wanted to ask on the podcast, but never remembered to actually ask is when you're reading a book, are you precious with, like, if you have a paperback, which I do, of The Stand, are you precious with the book, or are you the kind of reader that like bends it backwards and like roughs it up? And because I want to know like where you stand on that kind of stuff.
I'm somewhere in the middle. I feel like I do have like a certain reverence for the book where I don't want to completely, rip it up. Also, it's like, I feel like it's practical, because especially if you're reading a book like The Stand for a long time, if you're really rough with it, it might not last to the end.
Yeah.
But in general, like, especially a paperback, I also think that they're kind of designed to be beat up. That's like the whole point of them. They're not super pricey, heirloom objects, although they can last for a while. So in that sense, I don't really worry about it too much. So yeah, somewhere in the middle. How about you?
Yeah, I'm like weirdly precious about it.
Okay.
And like,
so no dog earring for you?
Well, yeah, no dog earring. I use bookmarks.
Yeah, I don't either.
And like, I don't bend the books at all. I don't like to bend them too far. Like, I like to, honestly, a lot of the time I just have it kind of resting in my hand, folded outward, and however the book naturally lays, I try not to bend it beyond that. And this is like a weird thing for me, because I find myself, I'm like, this book, it wasn't very expensive. I could buy another copy if I wanted to, if this gets too beat up. And for whatever reason, while I'm reading it, I'm just like, oh, it's so precious. I can't beat it up. And I'm glad I finally asked that on the podcast. But back to The Stand. There's a lot more sex in this book than I was expecting. Weirdly.
I think it might be the horniest Stephen King book that we've covered so far. That was a note I definitely put down. I didn't remember how horny this book was, but it's very
well. Even it's horny, and then at times it goes like to extreme sexual violence and stuff in many ways, and like it's just a lot of like, there's a lot of like sex going on in this, whether
and that's true in a lot of King's books, but not to this level. I would agree.
Specifically this second book too. Like this section was just like, I felt like every other chapter, it was like some couple was getting together, or some crazy thing was happening. And
it really feels to me like King was trying to push the envelope with this book a little bit. Like, I'm going to write a book that is about this epic confrontation, and it's kind of in the vein of a Lord of the Rings, yet it's going to be filled with sex. And that's why, like, when I look at Stephen King, like, I feel like there's some precursors to what we got later with, like, George R.R. Martin, right? Who, like, someone who wanted to take this sort of mentality and apply it to actual, like, secondary world epic fantasy. But I can see a lot of the same kind of tendencies here with King. And like to try and just make it gritty and, you know, quote unquote realistic, and you have characters fucking all the time, you know, and you know, all the like troubling things that can come along with that too is also in here. And there's a lot of stuff in here from King that I feel like he was still figuring out. You know, to give him the benefit of the doubt, maybe he was still in the process of learning, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff in here that didn't age well.
Yeah.
And I actually had the observation reading this that I think I have changed as a person significantly since I read this just 10 years ago. Because I didn't read this book when I was like, you know, 16 or something. Like I read it not that long ago in the scope of things, but a lot has happened in 10 years. And I feel like I've changed a lot in 10 years. And the dramatic difference I had in reading this book was a clear example of that, where just like all these things that I would have just read right over without even thinking about it, I was like cringing at. And, you know, some people will be annoyed by that because they'll say that I'm being, you know, I don't know, overly woke or something. But I'm happy with the fact that I can identify stuff now. Like I'm proud of that fact. And reading through it, though, I couldn't help but go, well, this is pretty sexist. Oh, this is kind of racist. Oh, this is definitely racist. This is very ableist. There's a lot of, like, problematic just stuff in this book. And I'm not trying to say that, like, because, like, I feel like the reduction of that point of view is people see that and go, like, oh, you can't ever have a bad character who's this, or you can't ever have a character who, you know, is magical if they're this, and that's not really the case. It's just more about like stereotypes and generalizations, and sometimes it's even like minor things that get tossed in where it's like not even necessary to the character, yet it gets thrown in there and it sort of tips the hand of the author. Like obviously there's a little bit of prejudice going on.
Right. And to give an example of this, almost every single character in the story refers to a mentally impaired, mentally handicapped person, potentially, which we can talk about, as by the R word, right?
Yeah.
Repeatedly, everyone is calling
I will also say, though, I know for a fact that was a term medically used in this era. And since then, I think it became a term that is no longer used. But to defend it a little bit, is I think that's literally what you were diagnosed with in that era.
Gotcha.
So that, you know, that I don't think he meant that as a slur, although it definitely, I think, had the connotation that way. And I think he does actually use some other slurs that were slurs at the time. So I'm not saying he's above it.
Right. Of this era, like you said, if I'd been younger when I read it, a lot of this stuff would have gone by me and I wouldn't have realized, like you said, some of the negative connotations or like negative things that are being said about people, because the world was definitely different then. So I can definitely see what you're saying about like this book changing for you.
It's weird because I feel like it really highlights the way I've changed more than anything. All that being said, like I'm still enjoying the book. Like I'm still really having a good time with it. And I don't want to say that like it has completely ruined the book for me or something. That's not the case.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know what that says about me or us in general. If it like I hope that it's a good thing that we can see the things that are wrong with the story and then still enjoy it. Because I think that's going to be the case for a lot of art. As you know, things are not going to date well as time goes on for forever. So to hopefully like to be able to see the art and maybe remove it and put it in the time that it came out. I do want to jump back to kind of talking about this section now. I think I appreciate the first book more, having read the second book, obviously, because King does so much to set up each of these unique characters. And they really do feel unique. I haven't read these characters before. You know, sometimes you'll read these stories with tons and tons of characters who interact in a similar, like, apocalyptic story. Like, these characters are unique to themselves for the most part. And I thought that was really the strongest part, was seeing all these characters come together, bounce off each other, fall in love, hate each other. the strength of this, I think, is definitely on the characters so far. Because that really is the whole story. The doomsday situation has happened, and then it's really just the goings on of life, and then now we're leading into a conflict that I'm still in the dark on going into book 3.
Yeah.
But most of book 2 is sort of like the human interaction of what's happened since the pandemic.
Well, and we'll get into it because we're going to go through character by character like we did last time. But one of the major unifying events is the creation of the Boulder Free Zone. And there's a lot that goes into sort of like organizing society. And there's like a committee that is formed. And I remember that was one of my least favorite parts when I originally read this book. Like, I liked it okay, but I feel like I thought it was kind of dry and just didn't really care that much. Whereas I actually was kind of into it this time a little bit more. And again, like, I think that's maybe just the way I've changed. Like, I sort of was nerding out about the idea of like, what would it be like to try and craft a society? And clearly they're using America as their blueprint. But they're free to like change and modify things as they wish. And I don't know. And like the idea of like they have this existential threat looming, and this like confirmation seemingly of like magical power in Mother Abigail, and the way that they have to like figure out what role she's going to have in society, and like what are the lasting implications of that? Are we a theocracy? And like I don't know. I liked all those conversations. I thought were pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very real way to deal with it versus like the more fantastical way where you don't really care about all of that, and you just go, yeah, we're going to follow this king because he's good and just, and we're going to believe in God because we all believe in God, and, you know, let's go.
The religion stuff is very interesting because you have just people all along the spectrum of life, like whether they were sort of like God-fearing or not, and to see
several agnostics talk about being agnostics or atheists,
in a post-apocalyptic world. I think religious people would say that everyone's going to turn to faith, right? They're going to be like, holy shit, God save me, please. There's nothing else to turn to. Mm-hmm. And to see like the sort of theological, like philosophical debates going on in this story was fun too, like between certain characters. Yeah.
Well, like Nick is, you know, he doesn't really believe it.
Right.
But it's funny because I do feel like King is putting his thumb on the scale because we keep getting like obvious demonstrations of it being true, and we do feel like Mother Abigail is right, and we feel like whether or not they, you know, she and others like understand God, like clearly there is something going on with higher powers here. And what the Dark Man represents is clearly sort of an evil, satanic maybe force, and it's hard to like look at a character who's agnostic and feel like they know what's up. It's instead you feel like they're just holdouts. You know,
a lot of them are having to deal with the fact that they don't believe in it, and there are clear supernatural things going on. Everybody's having the same dreams. Yeah. Everybody's, you know, seeing this person. Like, it's not just a phenomenon. Like that's like clearly something's going on.
Yeah, there's proof.
Exactly. They're drawing lines to the Antichrist. They're drawing parallels to God, and there's even questions of whether one of the characters is God, or like a vessel for God, or and like vessel
prophet
for the devil. Yeah. There's a lot of that going on as well. So, and you know, like I don't study religion really, and so I would love to know like how somebody what King might have been planting to sort of like draw parallels to like, I guess, Christianity or some sort of faith, to like little Easter eggs for those people.
And it's funny because I felt like King deliberately was leaning heavily into Christianity here, as it's almost like the magic system of this fantasy story. It's like, you know, there's an existing theology I can play off of. There's an existing magic system that many people wholeheartedly believe in, and many other people at least like kind of believe in or are willing to believe in. And because of that, The Stand it feels believable, right? Like it feels, even though it is still a fantasy with magic and gods and all this stuff, it's like, yeah, but it's Christianity. It's like, it's familiar, and it feels like stuff that people actually believe in. And the way he also ties that to like psychic abilities, like a lot of stuff that we've talked about, like people actually believe in this in the real world, and telepathy and stuff like that. And he takes that and he's like, yeah, you remember this thing you've actually heard of in real life, and you know that's true, and here's a character who can do it, and you want to believe it. So King is very good at making us buy into the fantastical in that way. Like he gives us entry points right?
He does do that a lot. We've noticed that.
Yeah.
Where he'll take like a real story that he reads in a newspaper or something, and then thread that into his story so that he can like, you know, show that it's some sort of supernatural element to his story. And you know, we get that with like, there's a conversation about planes and like how full planes are less likely to crash than half full planes or 60% full planes.
You know, it's funny. I was so taken by that story, right? He goes into about how there's like an abnormal number of cancellations before these planes that crashed, and he talks about this study that was done that showed that. And I was like, what is the truth behind this study, right? So I looked into it. Doesn't exist. No such story. No such study was ever done. The person
fictional.
he cites was invented by him.
Completely
fiction, but he does a really good job of selling you on it possibly being true.
Well, the thing is, like, I know this is early on in his career, but like he's done it now enough for me to be like, well, I assumed that it was something that he looked up in a newspaper, you know?
Yeah, but it's not. He just made it up. But he makes it sound really. And again, he's like, it sounds like something that you would buy. Like it sounds something that you would believe is true. So he's playing with you there. But yeah, I mean, well done.
Oh, something else I can't remember for sure, but we were listing King projects that we did last week, and I think because of The Shining, we forgot to mention Doctor Sleep.
Yeah, you're right. Shit, we did Doctor Sleep as well. We've done a lot.
I knew there were other ones that we didn't mention because we've done a lot of King, and it felt like we didn't list them all. So, but that brings me to the actual Shine, like is being mentioned by Abigail at one point. And I was like, wow, he's like, this is before The Shining, right? Before, so
no,
he's like,
this is after The Shining.
It is after? Okay.
Yeah, I think this is his fourth. I think this is right after The Shining.
Okay, gotcha. So he had already set it up in The Shining, but still,
before before a lot of other major novels that would come out. But
people talk about like interconnected worlds, and like I don't know. I would love to know like who began having like these massive blockbuster books or movies or whatever that were interconnected, but like not a lot of people have done it successfully, and he kind of is like, I think it was like a little known thing by like King fans that he had an interconnected world, and then as his sort of King renaissance has come about in the last like, I don't know, 10 years, I guess, because you know he was massively popular with his books and everything, but then his movies started to do well, and I think it's like common knowledge now, but it's crazy to think that he was doing this in the 70s.
I can't remember if this was something I listened to him talk about or if this was just theorizing, but it really seems like he includes a lot of it to be like little Easter eggs for his like devoted readership who read everything that he puts out. He's like, I'm going to put these little things in for them, these little breadcrumbs that tie things together, mention a character who's in another book, and then go, oh, I know who that character is, make them feel like they're in the know. But it's not required to like appreciate the book.
And clearly, like those Easter eggs have snowballed into the Dark Tower later on.
Exactly. Then they snowball, yeah. And then he writes the Dark Tower, which ties it all together, which at some point we have to cover because Randall Flagg is a very important character, I think, to that series. So
nice, cool.
I believe I haven't read it. This is just things I've heard. So that's not like something. I'm not coming with book knowledge. That's just what I've heard. Anyway, I think we got to get into these characters so that we have time to talk about what actually happens in this part. Before we do, we just wanted to mention that our Patreon has fully been updated. Some people have already been checking it out. We've got some people who've already upgraded to different levels. Our new art that we commissioned by Natalie Metzger is on there. You can get it on a mug, you can get it on a t-shirt, and so forth. Also, we just have other benefits available to different tiers. So if that interests you at all, please check out our Patreon, patreon.com/inktofilm.
Yeah, and we also have a survey up right now that we would love for you to check out. It's we're trying to collect data to understand our listeners and understand what they would like out of the podcast, and so that everyone can feel fulfilled here. So it's a 2-minute survey. So if you would be, if you have time for it, please fill that out for us, and it'll help us get a good grip on what everybody's looking for out of the podcast.
Yeah, and that is bit.ly/surveyitf, all lowercase. So yeah, just type that into your browser or whatever, pull it up. Yeah, 2 minutes, 10 questions, and it would be very helpful. I don't know if we added main characters. I feel like we kind of have in the second book. But we also have all of our ones that we went over with last time. Most of them have significant changes. I did want to kind of combine two, focusing mainly on Frannie, but Stuart Redman is definitely another major character, but a lot of his story sort of intertwines with her. And also kind of Harold, which is definitely, he's like a main character at this point. But again, very tied in with her. So let's focus on them. I think that'll give us a big chunk of the story. So last we left Frannie and Stuart, they had just met with Harold. They had just met all together. And the three, along with Bateman, arrive at Stovington to confirm not only the deaths of everyone at the Stovington facility, but also that Redman was nearly killed there. The group then continues on their westward journey towards Mother Abigail, during which time Goldsmith falls deeply in love with Redman, who is significantly older, a sentiment she records in her diary, in addition to many other aspects of the trip. Harold confesses his love to Frannie, and she politely but firmly rejects him, before she and Stuart reciprocate their feelings for each other despite their difference in age. They eventually enter a marital relationship once they settle in Boulder. Goldsmith serves on the original Free Zone Committee in Boulder and acts as its moral compass. Upon her union with Redman, Lauder becomes jealous, but later appears to have dealt with his emotions. However, Goldsmith remains suspicious of Lauder, which is later justified when she finds details of a plot to kill Redman in Lauder's diary with the use of a bomb. Goldsmith saves the majority of the committee when she intuitively senses the presence of the planted bomb. Goldsmith is moderately injured in the blast, but her unborn child remains safe. Goldsmith is opposed to Redman traveling west, but comes to terms with the journey when she realizes that Redman is compelled to follow through with the trip. Okay, so obviously a ton happens there. You know, it's a lot of the book, but yeah.
Yeah, and switching from first names and last names. This description has most of it in last names. So Redman is Stu.
Yeah, Stu Redman, yeah.
Lauder is Harold.
Harold,
and
Lauder,
then
yeah.
Goldsmith is Frannie.
Yes.
Just so that we're all clear here. So, yeah, like I'm definitely going to touch on Frannie, but just to kind of parallel what's going on at the same time, Stu basically rises to leadership at this in this free zone. Mm-hmm. And Harold is kind of like jealous in the shadows a lot of the time, but at some point he starts to kind of smile it off and like seems like he's doing all right. He gets in with like the grave diggers.
And go back to like they get together and she starts keeping this diary. And then there's like a really creepy point when they're first like having sex out in the woods where like we see that Harold's out in the shadows like watching them. And there's certain times where King really knows how to use that omniscient POV to like pull back and show you something that the characters themselves don't see. But gives you that sort of like, it's almost cinematic at times, it feels like, but he also can get into their minds in a way that you can in a movie. So it's really interesting. And he does that to great effect here. And then, yeah, like Harold decides he's going to start a diary of his own. He starts spying on her. He reads her diary and finds out about all the like thoughts she had about him, which weren't very, kind. I would think would be fair to say.
He's putting on a happy front in front of everybody. Everybody thinks he's doing well.
As soon as he does that, he's like, I'm going to fucking play the role that everybody wants me to play, but he's going to harbor all this resentment and just like bottle it up and let the rage fill him. And I feel like I really shat on Harold as a character because he is reprehensible in many ways, but like I want to give credit to King because he's a really compelling character. And I feel like he's the kind of person that, like, a lot of people know somebody like this.
Yeah, it feels real. That's the thing, right? Like, it's so creepy and it's so fucked everything he does, but it does feel realistic. It doesn't feel like some fantasy creation of the King.
Yeah, and, like, the way that he holds on to every grievance and, like, he just can't allow himself to move on. Like, if he would just let go of all this grievance, like, he would be fine. Like, he was, like, people liked him, like, he was respected in the community. A lot of the problems that he had, he didn't have to hold on to, but instead he just like keeps it all within, and he has to get his vengeance, and everybody's out to get him, and he can't ever trust anybody, and like people like that like create their own problems, and that's definitely what Harold seems to do here.
Yeah. When Frannie started keeping the diary, I was like, oh man, bad idea.
Yeah.
As much as it's good to probably jot this stuff down, probably gonna end poorly. And that also, like, one of the first things she writes is about how he, like, comes onto her fully. Harold, like, comes onto her and, like, tries to kiss her, and she, like, backs up and, like, falls over and she gets hurt. And, he's just, like, forcing himself on her, and it's gross. And then it leads to all the stuff that we're talking about here.
Oh, one other thing I want to say about Harold. He's terrible in many ways, but one of the ways that he's not terrible is that because he's fat. And it really bothered me how often it seemed like King was equating his physical appearance with his moral failings. And this is a trope a lot of people have identified, but he would constantly talk about him being fat and pimply, and like it was also like it seemed to be equated with his like problems, and then like as he became better looking and like his skin cleared up, it was like, oh, now he's a good person. And it's represented by this. And like the way those two things were tied together, it was like these two things have nothing to do with one another. And it really would frustrate me when he would tie those things together. But again, like I said, this book is just not his most forward-thinking book, by any stretch.
Right. Yeah. So Frannie. So obviously Frannie's pregnant this whole time, and basically no one knows until she tells Stu, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Stu's the first person she tells, and that's a crazy thing to have to deal with. Like people are taking, and was also wild and bizarre to me. Everybody's taking sleeping pills so that they don't have the bad dreams that they're all sharing and stuff.
Yeah.
And just like thinking about an entire community of people medicating themselves to not deal with these dreams and stuff is wild.
I mean, I can see it. I buy it, but yeah, it is pretty extreme. And then she's not doing it, obviously.
Right, she's not, just in case, because she doesn't want to tell anybody that she's pregnant, but she's, so nobody can tell her that it's okay for her to take these pills because she's pregnant. So she's being terrified nightly, basically by
who she imagines is having a coat hanger, the dark man in her dreams. And I just wanted to, it's just like kind of a writer thing, and I've highlighted it before, but I want to give it again because I know we have some listeners who are, writers themselves. And one of the things that King does, and I think it's kind of a trick, but it works so well, is he gives every character some sort of like little mantra or little like recurring image or recurring theme that they keep touching on, and it kind of like centers you in the character whenever he switches POVs. And one of them for Frannie is like her thinking of the coat hanger. Another one I think is the
every dog has its day.
Every dog has its day with Harold. A lot of these characters just have something like that. Where it's these little repeated phrases. And I'm sure I'm forgetting many of them, but I feel like every character has something like that. They touch back on, they circle back to it. Like with Larry, you ain't no nice guy. That one for sure. Like he constantly thinks about that phrase, and that is like a core. It's not just a throwaway phrase. It's like a core thing for him that he is like fixated on, and shows his like character growth of like he's trying to prove that wrong. So, they're important, but they work.
It's pretty cool because it's not jarring and it's not like invasive to the story, where like if you're reading it, every time you read it, it doesn't annoy you to read it again. Like you said, it kind of does
because he finds new ways to bring it in, and like how it applies to the new situation or a new thought the character is having about it.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And like you said, I think like a lot of people will read this and not even notice it. Like I was noticing that it was happening, but in the way that you just explained it, like I wasn't thinking of it that way. Like it is really a device of the writer.
I try and look at it from a writing point of view and go like, not just like appreciate the entertainment, but also go, everything that's happening is done for a reason. There's choices behind it, and why is he making these choices? And I think that's one of the things he's doing to establish character and to make it accessible to people. Like you can see, like it's very easy to see Larry Underwood's journey through looking at it in that lens. So it makes it kind of accessible in a way. Oh, I also really like I'm a sucker for epistolary writing. If I think I'm using that correctly here. And essentially what I mean by that is like when we get the writing of a character as the thing that we're reading. And we get that both with Frannie and Harold, where we're reading their direct writing, their thoughts. And it actually kind of switches POV because it says like because like it's literally Frannie's words, literally Harold's words. And I just love that. It's like another way to bring us close to the character. It's a thing that like writing can do that is really cool. It I guess like in a film it would be like found footage maybe a little bit, like, but even that is a little different because you're still like you might be viewing from behind the camera, but you're not in the head of the person doing it. So I don't know. It's something really fun that fiction can do. And when I remember her writing the journal, I was like, yeah, I love this part because I don't know, I just really like getting those direct, like right from the tap thoughts and feelings, and I don't know, I just think it works cool.
Yeah, and it keeps the narrative fresh too because it's sort of like you said, a switch POV. It's kind of like it feels different, feels fresh. And then there's a little bit of that as well with the minutes from the meetings that we're getting. We keep getting like the committee keeps coming together, and then we're getting like we're reading it as if we were reading a transcript of the meeting. So that's also pretty fun.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so do we want to talk about the bomb now, or do we want to like save that?
Yeah, I was gonna say I do want to kind of with the bomb stuff. My prediction is, and I don't know that this is necessarily like a bold prediction or anything, but I think that Franny's baby is like a shiner, like a has the shining of some kind. Like I think that like her, her moment of like realization in that moment and her terror. And there's a lot of moments of this throughout. And that also brings up another theory that I had. Like, are all of the people remaining on Earth people who can shine? Like, you know what I mean? Like, because they're all having the same dream, which is all sort of like telepathic in ways. They all seem to have like a sixth sense of some kind, or to differing degrees. So a lot of that, like, I kept coming. I was like, is this like
That's
a
an
world
interesting
of
theory? Like, almost like everybody who doesn't have this psychic ability, maybe those are all the people who died, and everybody who's left can either be psychically accessed by Mother Abigail or Randall Flagg, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought.
In some way. So yeah, I assume that her baby is, because she doesn't seem to have been shining or anything.
Well, she was having the dreams, though.
She's having the dreams, true.
But she was already pregnant at the start of the book, so you're saying maybe it's
Right.
like that connection
Linked.
is given it to her,
linked
maybe.
in that way. But that wouldn't explain why she would be immune if the shining or whatever power has some sort of immunity built into it. But just things I was thinking about. Yeah, the bomb was fucking wild and unexpected.
So I do want to save a little bit of the bomb talk because we're about to get into Nick next, and I think that he's a character to really focus on it. But before we get to there, I want to focus in on Stu and Frannie together as a couple, and like what was your take on them together? Do you like them together? Is it interesting?
Yeah, I do. I like them as a couple. It feels slightly weird that their age is different. But I think it's like through the course of like learning more about Stu, like I like him as a person. I like him as a leader.
He seems broadly likable,
and he's like a real character still. Like there are moments where she she tells him that she's pregnant, and she doesn't. She expects him to react one of two ways. Either like bail on her or just like embrace her and say like he loves her and like everything's gonna be okay. And he kind of does something in the middle. He doesn't run away or anything, but he doesn't like embrace her. He like looks at her and is like evaluating and is sort of like, which I think after going through everything you've gone through in this situation, like that would be somewhat realistic. So he's not necessarily, and I don't think, and we talked about that, like a lot of these characters aren't perfect. It's not like that makes him imperfect, that one situation, but there are things that he has his things. Another thing that sort of can be a little bit jarring is how much time we spend in certain situations, and then how much time whizzes by us sometimes. So like we sort of get we zoom in on certain moments and then we zoom out and they travel across the country in a few pages, and all this time has passed, which obviously needed to have happened for like an epic story of this size. So it feels quick to us in some ways. Like their relationship seems to advance pretty quickly, and they're like married basically at this point. And it happened quickly for us, but it seemingly was more time for them because they were traveling.
Yeah, he does an interesting job with that, of like zooming in, zooming out, keeping the pace moving. Although some people might argue against that. I know some people really don't like Stephen King's pace and think that he has too much in there, describes too many things. But
he's definitely a slow burn author. In his longer books, like it's clear that he like wanted to take his time with certain stuff. So
one thing that happens that I think we should at least spend a little bit of time on is when they're still on the road, they encounter these, I think like 3 or 4 guys who have this quote unquote harem of women that they've captured, and there's this wild shootout. Bunch of people die, and they sort of liberate these women, and then they come along to the Boulder Free Zone. What do you think of that whole part?
I mean, the horrific shit going on, right?
Yeah.
Like these guys are like there's like 4 men and 8 women, I think, and they're just like raping these women every day, drugging them so that they don't fight back. There's like a moment that I actually had to, like, I was so shocked by it that I took it back and played it out loud for my girlfriend because she's already read the book, and I was like, do you remember this part? Because this is wild. They said something about how like he took barbed wire and like ran it across her butt.
Yeah.
And then like her rectum bled for days, and I was like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? And so yeah,
pushing the envelope, you know what I mean? Like I feel like I don't know where like The Road came out. I should probably look that up, but Stephen King is so well read. He's trying to like blend genres and stuff, and I feel like he's like, I'm gonna write this epic fantasy, but I want it to also be this gritty post-apocalyptic brutal thing, and he writes horror as his like primary genre, so like He wants to go there. He wants to push the envelope. I think he felt like that was an essential calling to the horror writer, is like, I'm going to go with the extreme details that people aren't going to expect. And he's talked about that, how he, the different elements of horror, whether that's like, creepiness, terror, or just the gross out. And he like talks about how he does all of them. And that is definitely like kind of a gross out moment. But he feels like that's all tools in the toolbox.
Right. And it's extremely shocking. And I don't, the barbed wire thing is a crazy thing to have come up with in his Stephen King brain, but like the harem itself, like, is something that like some of the worst people in society would do if they survived in this apocalyptic situation. So it's not like it's it's not like it's this fantasy thing. It is pretty gritty and real, and of course something like this would probably happen. It was just wild. And then the shootout was interesting. Stu was kind of the only person who could actually fight back he was like the only person that could handle a gun well, it seemed like. And even then he wasn't like great. So it was an interesting sort of sequence.
So I definitely shouldn't bring up The Road because it was written in 2006. A much newer novel than I thought. Yeah, sorry.
Wow, I thought it was older than that.
I thought it was older too. But no, 2006. Anyway, one of these days we're going to cover The Road. I think there was, I was a little bit frustrated with the characters and how I feel like they didn't get integrated into society very well. They continue to be kind of outsiders. And I was noticing that with a lot of the women, especially in his society, Frannie and Lucy, and Susan, a lot of them like have very specific sort of gendered roles. Frannie is, she's the moral compass of the committee. I don't know, it just felt very like stereotypical,
man's world
kind of
yeah,
stuff.
Yeah.
And I know he also talks about like, well, nowadays, that's what happens when you revert back to the old ways. And I don't know, like,
yeah, well, there are moments, it's clearly patriarchal, like
very,
and like this world has been for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
But there's the moment that it wasn't really needed, where it was like, women are vulnerable when they're pregnant, and like they're weaker than men, and he goes on about it for a little bit.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know. I don't think there was really any need for it.
I know that is a theory behind like how the patriarchy came to be, and like, why it persisted, and his point about it like probably holding more weight in a post-apocalyptic world, I think makes sense. Yet there's so many other things from like America and like modern society that are brought along that it's frustrating to not see more characters want to bring that to their new society.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting that like they like the first time we jump into a committee meeting, it's literally just like they're acting as if it's like a full on like hearing, like in a court system, and they're like, hear ye,
yeah,
and all the specific, and I'm like, how do they know how to do all this? Like, I don't know how to run a court meeting.
Yeah, with like minutes and all this stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. There was one part in particular, I guess I'll bring it up now, that because I'm talking about the role that the women play, and one thing that I stands out to me is we don't see a lot of alternative lifestyle type characters, if you want to call it that. People who are bisexual or homosexual, whatever, like in our Boulder Free Zone, and one of the only ones we do is Dana Jurgens. She is described as being a lesbian at one point that Frannie sort of reveals, and the way Stu reacts to it, I thought was bizarre, and the like assumptions that are made were showing me that like it felt like King doesn't understand what it means to be a lesbian, or to be bisexual.
Yeah.
Because he talks about her being like a man. He's like, I didn't think she was a man hater, and it's like, that's not what a lesbian is. It's a different thing. And then like, and then the example like Frannie gives is that she's like, I think she's bi now because she seems okay with everybody. And it's like, that's not what bisexual means either. Like it was very like, I think, I don't know how you do so much research and like understand things so well and then just like fail completely at understanding what all of that means.
Yeah.
It was a little bit bizarre, and shows me that there's just like some stuff that King need to work on. We're looking back at a book, although it was updated. We should also say, like, I don't know if you've noticed, it was updated in the revised version, and a lot of the references get updated to like the 90s and like late 80s and stuff. Although it was written in the 70s, but I don't think he updated a lot of this stuff because he probably felt like it would like open up a can of worms if he started revising this kind of stuff, because people have read both versions. I don't know. This just feels very dated to me, a lot of this stuff. And
Yeah. The argument, and like devil's advocate here, because I totally agree. He's not very progressive, clearly, but there could be something here where he's saying like Stu feels that doesn't understand the sexuality of it. And like
you can make that claim that like it's the character. But when it's multiple characters talking and nobody's giving the, like, no one's correcting them, I don't know. It just seems a certain way, man. It's hard to argue. And plus, it's presented in sort of omniscient POV sometimes where there's some of that stuff. But let's not linger on it too long. Let's talk about Nick, and then we can get into the bomb.
Yeah, Nick, my favorite character.
We both talked about how much we liked him.
Yeah.
So Nick Andros, he eventually recovers from the infection in his leg and begins his journey to Hemingford Home, Nebraska. Along the way, he meets Tom Cullen and later Brentner, June Brinkmeyer, Gina McCone, Dick Ellis, and Olivia Walker. The group becomes a surrogate family to him. Andros leads the growing band of survivors to both Nebraska and Mother Abigail, who guides them on to Boulder. Andros serves on the Free Zone Committee, for which he is the leading thinker, and eventually recruits Tom Cullen as a member of the spy contingent that travels to the West Coast. He does not like or trust Harold Lauder, and unilaterally nixes Lauder's initial placement on the FZC, which is the Free Zone Committee. Andros is killed by Lauder's assassination attempt on the committee, and it is later revealed that Andros was meant to lead the stand against Flagg by Mother Abigail. So, I mean, yeah, Nick dies in the explosion. It's like, I remember, like, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. I just remember being gutted by this the first time I read the book.
Yeah, devastated. I was like, no way. I was like, yes. Like, Stu represents the leader, the person who's like the natural protagonist sort of in the story.
Everyman,
but Nick was also sort of right there with him.
Yeah.
And I assumed that Nick was going to be like massive in the battle to come. I assumed that he was going to be, because he had like, I think it was being set up and like, I hook, line, and sinker, like I bit onto that bait that he was being set up to be sort of the person who I think he's meant to be the character that audiences respond the most to. He's been through some of the hardest things that you could be through in this situation. And he already led a small contingent himself. His relationship with Tom, who we'll talk about since we're here, is something that, like, when Tom went off, that Nick was taking it the hardest, even though he was the sort of the spearhead to like get him to go.
Yeah.
And to know that, like, whatever happens with Tom, ultimately I know that there's going to be a moment where Tom is looking for Nick, I assume, if he makes it back or they make it over or whatever. And it just sucks to know that, like, he's not going to be there. And really, he died trying to save everyone. Like, he had like the shine at like some sort of, again, the same kind of thing.
He knew that the bomb was there, and he was like trying to get to it to, I don't know, do something with it, diffuse it,
he was trying to
do
like
something.
take it apart. It was rough. And like I was like, they kept talking about a bomb, or like, they were hinting at Harold was creating something, and then Nadine planted the bomb, and I assumed like a bunch of people would die potentially because the bomb was being planted. Definitely didn't think it would be main characters. I was like, oh, okay, this will be like a shocking thing to motivate people to leave and to go fight Flagg. But yeah, I definitely didn't take it well. I was kind of pissed at King for a minute, but from the story standpoint, I understand, and it, there's a reason why it's as affecting as it is.
I mean, it's a gut punch, and it's definitely meant to be. I also read a sort of outside the scope of the story, but I think it's interesting. King talked about how he faced some writer's block with this book, and how now this is, for King, because he wrote this whole book in like 4 or 5 months, I think I read somewhere, when he was living in Boulder, which we talked about, which I think is important for the fact that so much of it takes place in Boulder. But the part he got stuck on was the formation of the new Boulder Free Zone. And he felt like he was like endlessly writing about committees and forming of, the society. And then it was the idea that Nadine and Lauder would come together and hatch this plan and use the bomb and blow up Nick. And that was, he literally credits that idea with like getting him out of it. He had to like blow it up to wake up the characters and make them take Randall Flagg seriously. And I don't know, I just thought that was interesting, the idea of like being kind of stuck, but then literally like blowing it up and going like, somebody's gonna have to like wake everybody up and make them deal with this threat. And that's kind of what happens like in the plot of the book, right? Like it makes the characters focus, but then also like that was what King had to do to himself to get himself to move on to the next phase of the novel.
Yeah, very interesting choice. And you can kind of see that, you know, with the stuff that goes on, that he was kind of spinning his wheels. As much as I enjoyed it, it did feel like we were just kind of spending a lot of time. I mean, you know, over a third of the book, easily over a third of the book, takes place here. And it's, you know, again, I think that all of this weight that he's bringing to all of these characters, the baggage that they have, the interactions that they've had, is what's going to make the finale feel, you know, it'll be satisfying, I assume, heading there. And so like it's not like I didn't enjoy it. Like I said, but very interesting to know that like Nick killing Nick, I'm sure it was hard for him to do too, because I think that he's a character, like I said, that was being built up to be, I feel like he probably thought, all right, Nick is going to lead the charge, and that's why he wrote it in that that Abigail says like Nick was going to lead the charge, because he probably had that sort of idea going into the showdown with Randall Flagg.
Yeah.
And then realized he had to kill Nick in order to get there.
I think you're right. And I think it also shows that this book wasn't like thoroughly plotted. It was kind of, it was developed over time, you know, as some writers like to say, like it was done by the seat of the pants. And it seems like that is probably the case here. So let's talk about Tom Cullen, because he sort of interacts a lot with Nick. And as we're still on Nick, he's a new character who gets introduced in book 2. So Tom Cullen, a man initially thought to be in his mid-20s to mid-30s, appears to be mild to moderately intellectually challenged. Andros encounters him while cycling from Arkansas to Nebraska through Oklahoma. After Andros learns that Cullen remembers his father's return from the Korean War, he realizes that Cullen must be much older, perhaps in his 40s. The two bond closely, despite the fact that Andros cannot speak and Cullen cannot read Andros's notes. When the two encounter Brentner, Cullen is finally able to learn Andros's name. Cullen's speech includes colloquialisms such as "my laws" and "laws, yes." He frequently references himself in third person. Cullen also punctuates important points, believing them to be spelled M-O-O-N, such as exclaiming "M-O-O-N, that spells Nebraska," when he is required to make a logical connection. Cullen can slip into a form of self-hypnosis, wherein he is able to make connections that he cannot make while, quote, awake. That is, conscious and focused on something superficial. Andros, Redman, and Bateman use this ability to place post-hypnotic suggestion in Cullen that will help him to act as the third free zone spy. During Cullen's hypnosis, Andros, Redman, and Bateman discover that while hypnotized, Cullen possesses the same type of foresight as Mother Abigail, concurrently referring to himself as Tom that Andros met in Oklahoma and, quote, God's Tom. Okay, so a character that I really like, Tom Cullen, but I think he's deeply problematic, is my guess.
Yeah, he's not handled well.
And I think, I don't know how realistic he is in any way. I just have to look at him as sort of just a completely fictional invention. That there could be a person like this, you know, and just kind of go with it in order to enjoy the character. I don't know. He's kind of tough to talk about, and I think he's probably a character. One of the characters who has not aged well at all is Tom Cullen, as far as like being sensitive to these sort of issues. But I don't know. I still like the character. I don't know. What's your thoughts on Tom Cullen?
You know, I think King wanted to come into this story approaching a lot of sensitive subjects and things that people deal with. Like we have Nick with his deafness and his muteness, and we have Tom with whatever ailment he has. I understand wanting to like represent this sort of character, and I think that like that's a good idea in general. But yeah, it was tough, especially like I said with the handling. Now reading it now is tough with the handling of like they're using the R word quite a lot, like repeatedly. And it's just tough to hear that in general, but like a compelling character. And I think it's like you said, it is tough to talk about, but this idea of a character who I hope this isn't offensive, but to put it in terms of something that I can equate it to is like Tom Cullen's is sort of a younger person in mentally, I would say. Like it seems like he is almost like a child in a grown person's body. I really hope that's not offensive. Having a character like this who is powerful and has powers on their own, and also there's sort of the innocence that's baked into that, and there's sort of the relationship that's built with, like, he's relying on Nick in a lot of ways when they first meet, and then he ultimately saves Nick from this tornado, which is a scene that we should definitely talk about, the tornado scene. And like I think there's a lot of interesting things going on there, and I just don't know how well they hold up. Like you said, it's really tough to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I do love them together when he can't read and Nick can't speak, so they have no way of communicating. You can't tell him his name, and yet they still form this bond together and look out for each other. I really liked that part. I love the way they interact with each other. It almost becomes like I don't want to say like a father-son, but maybe more like siblings, like brothers. And
like an older brother. Yeah, that's a good comparison for sure.
Yeah, I really like that part too, right? And I can't help but point out that it is sort of othering the way that he uses his like different mental state to like say that he's magical. Like he uses it as like a way to take the thing that makes him different and say that is like, cosmic or tied to magic in some way, and I don't know. That's the way he works in the story. Also, the way that he's like able to be hypnotized and like made into a sleeper agent, it feels very like Manchurian Candidate. And I think he even mentions that at one point, and I'm wondering if that was like on purpose. He's
maybe.
this like he can be triggered by this like catchphrase, and it's gonna.
And he keeps doing the MOON thing, and that feels very, very deliberate to me. Obviously,
and that was in it as well, right? Like, wasn't there?
Was it?
I don't remember if it was Henry who says that, or if there was like another character in the ward with Henry who used to say that.
I remember Henry like looking at the moon and the moon like speaking to him. I do remember that. Or somebody in jail. There was somebody in jail at one point. Maybe that was older Henry.
If you're a Kinghead and you remember, you know exactly what we're talking about, write in and let us know. I feel like there's a connection between Tom Cullen. I feel like Tom Cullen might have even been in the ward with Henry. I don't know.
Wow.
I could be wrong about that. But write in and let me know. I'm sure people know.
And that's something else I was thinking about. That could be potentially like sort of world breaky, because like how could Tom Collins exist in a world where I guess it would be the before the Stand world, because how could he exist in a world where there's
obviously the Stand doesn't happen in it because they the way they age. I think it would be I think it's the multiverse,
parallel universes
and stuff.
Got it.
I think that's what it is.
So the MOON thing, I assume, is going to be important going forward. Like that's a theory that I had, was like he keeps MOON like misspelling things, which is like, again, feels kind of weird to be like that. That's his sort of repeated phrase, and it feels offensive to have him be like misspelling things as his repeated thing. But anyway, that moon thing, like I just feel like that's something. There's something to that. There's going to be something that recurs later with that.
So one of the other parts that one of the characters that I really didn't believe. So this is different than like I don't like a character because they do things that I don't like in the course of the story. This was a character I didn't believe was a real person. And that was when Nick meets up with this young girl, young woman in this town. He meets her in like a supermarket, and she immediately wants to have sex with him,
which is so weird, and that's why it's unbelievable to me. Honestly, that's the most unbelievable.
That happening, but also the character. I just didn't buy the character at all. She was like, just hanging out, having a good time, super selfish. Just like the idea that a character like that could exist in this world was bizarre to me. That she's been alone in this town when everybody she knows has been killed. Everybody she loves has been killed. She has to take care of herself. Even if stuff's lying around, she still has to do it. The idea that she would just be like on a holiday and just, be in complete nympho mode, just wanting to have sex with the first guy she saw and not like at all like nervous or like, I don't know. Just like, I just didn't believe that character at all. I don't know.
I assume that I've assumed since reading that she would come back in some way and be important and do something. But Nick is clearly not gonna. There's no confrontation to be had with Nick because Nick is gone now. So maybe that was just a random one-off character.
Yeah, I don't remember. She may come back in book 3. We'll see. All right, so let's talk about Larry Underwood, our good friend Larry, who we really disliked in the first book. I think it's safe to say he becomes more likable in this book. He's sort of beginning his journey to becoming a better man. So, haunted by his dreams of Flagg and Rita, Underwood is in a semi-catatonic state of self-reflection for several days until he finally collapses from exhaustion in New Hampshire. This event is the beginning of a turning point in Larry's life, a change of soul, from that of a taker to something more. Recovering after a night's sleep, Underwood travels to Maine where he plans to spend the summer until he meets Nadine Cross and the young Leo Rockway, known only as Joe, and behaving like a feral creature. The three travel together to Algonquin, where they find Lauder's painted sign and the directions that it displays. Deciding to follow the directions, Underwood leads Cross and Joe to Stovington, Vermont, meeting Lucy Swan along the way. In Stovington, they find only Lauder's directions to Nebraska. Underwood, who gradually finds himself in the unexpected role of a trusted group leader, brings a growing party of people across the country to Nebraska and finally to Boulder. Although Underwood is initially interested in Cross, she spurns his advances and he begins a relationship with Swan instead. Arriving in Boulder, Underwood settles down with Swan and Joe, becoming a member of the Free Zone Committee. Cross attempts to reconcile her relationship with Underwood, but he refuses to be amenable, choosing to remain with Swan. Underwood later breaks into Lauder's home with Goldsmith after Joe instructs him to embark on an investigation before something horrible happens. They find Lauder's ledger, in which Lauder has documented his intention to kill Redman. However, Lauder's plan is already in motion at this stage, and Redman narrowly escapes the assassination attempt the next day. Underwood leaves Boulder with Redman, Brentner, and Bateman after Mother Abigail instructs them to go to Las Vegas. Okay. So yeah, some stuff we haven't touched on here, namely the introduction of Joe and Nadine. So yeah, and him, and obviously Underwood, Larry growing into this role more. Once again, this summary has a lot of last names, so hopefully you could follow that. Nadine Cross, Larry Underwood, Leo Rockway. Anyway, yeah. What are your thoughts on Larry?
I was kind of along the lines that I thought that he would sort of start to be redeemed, and it happens fairly quickly. So it wasn't like it was this massive theory that I had or anything, but like almost right away when we start book 2, he's like on his own, and then eventually Nadine and Joe find him, and then he like finds himself being protective and like realizing like he doesn't want what happened to
Rita.
He doesn't want what happens to Rita to happen to them, and so he starts to take on this role of like a protector, and he's scared of teaching her how to ride a motorcycle. I like that he's being redeemed. He's much more interesting now than he was when he was just being a dick all the time.
Yeah.
He still has the cool thing where like he's a musician, which I enjoy. And Joe like sort of connecting with that I think is really fun, and Joe running around with a guitar case all the time and like cracking it out and just being like a prodigy and just starting to play like all the stuff that he plays just off of his own ear. Thought that was a lot of fun. Yeah, and then like he to skip ahead a lot when they're in the Free Zone Committee, when they're in the Free Zone, his relationship with Cross is strained because like he starts like in a relationship with Swan, who like Nadine Nadine has this weird, we should talk about this for sure. Nadine has this thing where she's a virgin and she's compelled to keep that virginity because she's always felt like there was some dark purpose to it. Literally her words in like in her own monologue, in her own like head, was like she felt like it had some dark purpose, which is ominous. And then
well, she's like she gets the impression, and we get the impression that she is fated to get with Randall Flagg and like bear his child,
which feels real fucking weird too.
Yeah. So yeah, it to me it's kind of setting her up as like, is she gonna like give birth to the Antichrist or something, right? Like, is that what's gonna happen with this? It
does feel like that a little bit. All the stuff that goes on where she kind of does love Larry, but nothing ever comes of it because of that relationship with. I think she does come on to him though, right? And he says no.
Oh yeah.
He's with,
she comes on to him. He says no, and that's what sends her to Harold, essentially, right? Like she leaves and
Yeah.
goes to Harold, and their relationship
Their
is
sex stuff,
wild.
their sex stuff is also wild. Again, creation of Stephen King, where I'm just like, okay, Stephen King, you're gonna
Yeah, it seemed a little bit over the top.
wild, yeah. Which, like, not kink shaming or anything like that.
Right.
It just seems like the toxicness of that relationship and everything going on with it.
Well, yeah,
but
it's very
yeah.
like they're both using each other, and like she's using Harold because she knows or like suspects that she can use sex as a way to like get him to do what she wants, and then he like in turn starts to resent her for it once he gets what he wants out of it, and he turns it on her, I guess, in a way. And I don't know. Yeah, it's a very toxic relationship. It's not healthy in any way. So it's not as much about like what they're doing. It's more about just the way it's set up is very disturbing.
The context, yeah. And it's also like, it seems like she's using it to entice him towards Flagg.
Yeah.
Like to basically saying, like, if you have if you want this sex, if you want all this stuff that I'm going to do, which I guess they don't technically, that's another thing we should say, is that they don't actually have sex. They do everything else.
Well, it depends
So
on how you define sex. I mean, a lot of people would say that everything they're doing is also sex.
It is sex, yeah.
It's not vaginal
in terms
sex,
of like
we should say.
vaginal sex, yeah.
Yeah.
That she's still technically a virgin in that way.
Yeah.
Which is so still like leading to the Flagg situation, I assume.
Yeah.
And so she was basically
and,
like
another example of like women being relegated to certain roles, right? Like her and Frannie, it's both about like either like the child she's carrying or the child she could carry. It's very like
Right.
I don't know. It's just like that's their role in society now is to bear children. This is all stuff that didn't occur to me when I read this book 10 years ago, or if it did, I didn't like linger on it or like ask myself, what does this mean? It was just more like, okay.
Yeah, to put myself in the shoes of like a younger me reading this, I would have been like, this stuff is awesome because it's so shocking and crazy.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And like I would have been like, this is cool for the fact that it is so over the top and so shocking in these ways. And I think that like I said, I think society was also like that a little bit to an extent.
Yeah, so I mean, Nadine, she's also another one of those characters where like you want to root for her at first, but then she like when she gets rebuffed by Larry, she like goes full into her role with Flagg. Like she feels like that's what she's destined to do, I guess. It is a little weird that like Larry turning down sex ends up being like bad. Like his commitment to Lucy and not sleeping with this other woman that ends up being what sets Nadine off. I don't know. Is that I think it's supposed to be just kind of like ironic or like yeah, I guess ironic. How did you view that part? Like, do you blame Larry at all, or is it what is King setting up there?
I think that's just the motivation, right? Like that's to motivate Nadine to do these things for more than anything.
Yeah.
And like it's been set up in the dreams and everything that she's going to be involved with Flagg in some way.
Okay, so I have two other characters I want to focus in on before we're done. I don't necessarily need to read all of his summary, but let's talk about the Trashcan Man, because he was introduced in part 1 and we get a lot more of him here. We get his run-in with the kid, and a lot of really troubling stuff goes on between the two of them, and then ultimately the kid gets killed by wolves, or is assumed to die to the wolves, and Trashcan is able to escape from him and join the group in Las Vegas. And this is like one of the only times we've actually seen what's going on in Las Vegas is through his eyes. Yeah. So what did you think of this character? What do you think of this part?
I mean, Trashcan Man felt like such a weird character to me going in, like in book 1. I was like, I don't understand how this has anything to do with anything else other than the fact that I assumed he would be manipulated. And then we get this is a long chapter also. This is like very, very
and I think
long.
most of this was added back into the expanded version. Okay. I think a lot of this stuff was added. So
Gotcha.
Which I don't know if, I mean, like it's in the version we're reading, so we can't treat it differently.
Right. But to be honest, it kind of feels like you could just pull this out and it's a short story, like within the world of The Stand or something like that. You know, like if King wanted to do something like that. But it goes places. So he meets this person, the kid, and right away you're like, this person seems like unhinged a little bit.
Yeah, he's got this really nice car, and he's like super proud of it, but
he has like his gun out at all times, right? Or like,
oh yeah. He's got this like pompadour. Like he felt like a throwback to another era, even at the time that this book was written, which is maybe what King was going for.
He's got like a hot rod and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, this guy's wild, and then he I'm trying to remember the order and how it happens, but basically he's like, I'll give you a ride, and then he jumps in and they start drinking beers.
He's obsessed with Coors.
Coors, yeah, of all beers, yeah, it was funny.
Yeah, you believe that happy crappy is the thing he says over and over again. So again, like, he has like a little repeated phrase he says a lot, you know.
Yeah, they end up in a hotel room at some point, right? Or it's some sort of room, and they just drink beers and drink beers and drink beers, and he kind of forces Trashcan Man to drink these beers. And I thought Trashcan Man was going to be like a character that we just hate completely.
Yeah.
And then there's like this you feel pity, you feel like a lot of things, honestly, for like his situation and the things that go on here. But it's dark. They drink a bunch of beers, and then like in the middle of the night he's woken up and like sodomized by a gun, and like he gets raped by he's raped. Yeah. And it's super, super graphic and brutal. And then they get up the next day and continue their journey, and they find a roadblock, and there's a tunnel, which is a callback to the whole Larry situation, and that omniscient voice does kind of comment on that, and like, you know, in the way that Larry pushed through the tunnel. Basically, the kid has Trashcan Man go to the tunnel and find a way to move all this stuff out of the way, because he can't leave his sick hot rod behind. So he goes off on his own and gets too scared and comes back, realizing that like there's no way for them to get through. And then that's when the kid like starts freaking out, but like Trashcan Man's also kind of like praying to the Dark Man, or to the person.
He's been like communing with Flagg, it feels like. Yeah.
And then like this is the second time, technically we haven't talked about it yet, but this is the second time we've seen animals manipulated by Flagg. And so these wolves come up and kind of like, you know, start attacking the kid. And then some of the a part that I thought was kind of fun and cool was the wolves like escort him through to the next part of his journey, like escort him across the country, I assume, back to Vegas. And that was kind of fun. And then he gets to Vegas, and there's this whole infrastructure.
Real quick, I gotta say that this feels very Lord of the Rings to me. Like, this feels like doesn't Sauron like control like wolves and crows and like other like creatures, dark creatures and stuff? Like, he can see through their eyes or something, and
I think so.
Or it's mentioned that he can. And the way that that's tied together, and he sort of controls these creatures, this feels very fantasy to me. But it's presented in a cool way, yeah. Yeah,
and then the whole, there's like infrastructure set up at when he gets there. It's like they've clearly
he meets our character from the start.
Lloyd,
he meets Lloyd, who is quite different in my opinion. Like, I think you can tell
a changed person
that he's been changed by his role and maybe by this item he has. It seems to have like
he's like confident. Yeah, he's like confident, and he has like he has a position of power, it seems like, a little bit within the ranks.
Yeah.
Eventually they're like, all right, Trashcan Man, you're gonna meet Randall Flagg, and then he takes him to meet Randall Flagg.
And he sort of tells him that he wants him to help him like burn stuff, right? Which is exactly what Trashcan wants to hear. Is what he always wanted to do.
This is our pyromaniac character from the first book, if you didn't remember that from last week.
Yeah, and so I've been trying to stay away from anything about the new show, but I couldn't help but stumble onto some outrage, because you know it's on all over Twitter, and I'm on Twitter a lot. I know that there is a lot of people upset with how Trashcan is shown in the show. I haven't seen it yet, so I can't comment on it myself. I'm sure that's something we'll touch on. But apparently his characterization, or the way he's shown, is somehow just like really crosses a line, from what I've been seeing. So so that's something to look out for. I'm sure we'll pick up on. But and I'm sure, I mean, it's problematic in the book too, but it's something about like taking it to modern day, making it a show that comes out today. I mean, it's just gonna strike people differently, and I assume there's something about it that just makes it worse. So I'll be curious to see what that is. You know, stay tuned. So this also brings up a part that we didn't touch on. I didn't know when we'd touch on it, but I want to do it now. We get a whole section from the point of view of Kojak. And it's one of my favorite parts of the entire book. I just
so
love
awesome.
it.
Yeah, it's so awesome.
So first off, fucking Glenn Bateman, how dare
Yeah.
you? He left Kojak.
I mentioned Kojak in our last week's coverage just because I was like, I love Kojak. This is great. And then they're like, oh, yeah, we can't take him on motorcycles, so we're just going to ditch him in the woods and he'll take care of himself or whatever. I'm like, they left their dog behind.
Yeah, like, what the fuck? You get a backpack, you figure out a way to like take that dog with you. I don't know what you got to do, but you get a sidecar for your motorcycle. You find a way. But anyway, yeah, they don't. And then Kojak finds them, like travels all the way to Boulder.
Thousands of miles.
Yeah, and when they find him, he's like all injured. And they're like, I don't know what happened to this dog, but he clearly got in a tussle with something. And then we get this section where it's Kojak's point of view and talking about how he goes to Nebraska, and then he gets in this like epic battle with these wolves. He fights off like 4 wolves, kills like 2 of them, maims another one, keeps the other one at bay. Kojak's a complete badass. And I just love the way that it was written. I don't know, like I just thought it was really cool. And like I had read other Stephen King books even at the time of reading this, and also just like one thing I like about Stephen King is you don't know where he's going to go. You're like, this guy is capable of anything. He's a madman. And so like, could he have killed Kojak in a brutal way? Absolutely. He's capable of that. And we've seen that happen. I mean, like in It, like, animals are often killed in King's books. So I thought, like, I don't know how Kojak's gonna be dealt with here, but like, this is one of the coolest parts. And then we hear that Kojak lives for a long time, lives until he's like 16. So we even get like a happy ending attached to Kojak's story.
Yeah, that was cool.
Which I thought was cool. Yeah.
Which kind of is a spoiler for the fact that like life goes on, after the end events of this book.
Yeah, and I mean he's doing it on purpose, right? Like this is not done accidentally. So King is using it to foreshadow something. It's like giving you a little bit of hope, but also a little bit of because it said that he outlived Glenn Bateman. Yeah, and so we don't know. It's like, wait a minute, does Glenn Bateman die of
That's exactly what
natural
I thought,
causes or from something else? So he raises this question in your mind.
Glenn Bateman is one of the oldest of the group.
Yeah, but he's not as old as like the judge, who I think was like in his 70s, who gets sent. So like
that's true.
I think he's middle aged. So I don't know. It's that raises a question in and of itself. How and why does he outlive Glenn Bateman? So it's interesting.
So let's talk about Abigail, Mother Abigail.
Yeah, Mother Abigail is our last major character I want to touch on. So let me read a little bit about her. Abigail Fremantle, also known as Mother Abigail, leads the, quote, good survivors of the Captain Tripp's plague and also claims to be a prophet of God. The survivors have dreams of her telling them to come to see her in Nebraska. She is 108 years old and lives in a farmhouse near Hemingford Home, Nebraska, and was known in her community pre-Superflu mainly for surviving vicious racism when she was younger and voting for Republicans in every election she had ever seen. Born to freed slaves from South Carolina, Abigail outlived a succession of 3 husbands, as well as her 7 children. She is of the 0.6 population that is immune to Captain Tripp's virus and initially appears to some of the plague survivors in their dreams, drawing them to her just as Randall Flagg draws the evil survivors to him. She and her followers make their way towards Boulder, Colorado, where they establish the Boulder Free Zone government. Abigail receives visions from God, though when she believes she has sinned due to pride, she loses her foresight and goes into exile in the wilderness. She later regains her ability and returns to the Boulder Free Zone, just in time to inadvertently save most of the Free Zone committee from Harold Lauder's assassination attempt. On her deathbed, she shares one final vision. 4 men from the committee are to travel to the West Coast to confront Flagg. She makes no prediction as to what will occur, only that one will fall before arriving in Las Vegas, while the remainder will be brought before Flagg. Mother Abigail dies shortly after revealing this prophecy. Okay, so Mother Abigail, a very problematic character. I'm going to point everyone again. I did this in the past, but I want to point everyone again to Nnedi Okorafor's essay, which was called Stephen King's Super-Duper Magical Negroes. It was published in 2004. I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes. Nnedi Okorafor is a fan of Stephen King's, but she outlines this problem in a way that I think is a must-read. And it talks a lot about his magical Negroes, as she calls it, and I think others have called it, and his works. And Mother Abigail is definitely that. She's one of the only black people that seems to be in the Boulder Free Zone. And she is this prophet character. She's magical. She's there to save and service the white people. There's just a lot of problems with this character.
Yeah.
But all of that being said, I think she's the Gandalf of this story. I think she's the Gandalf to the Lord of the Rings in the Lord of the Rings comparison.
We've made the Lord of the Rings comparisons, and when she left and just went into the woods randomly, I was like, oh, so like we have to get rid of our Gandalf character so people can be in peril and things can happen, and like you know the all-knowing, all-seeing wizard isn't here to save everyone.
Yep. And that's what happens when she dies. She gives one last prophecy and then dies. Which, you know, and to King's credit, his Gandalf dies and stays dead, essentially, right?
Well, we don't know yet.
Yeah, that's true. We haven't read the third book yet.
I assume that she's going to come back as
even more powerful and maybe
to fight Sauron. Randall Flagg.
So, yeah, Mother Abigail draws everyone in. I did like a lot of her backstory. She feels, you know, very well realized as a person, even though she has all this other stuff going on that undercuts that. But I don't know. It was weird how much she was like, and she's very tied to like the land and like the tradition and the old ways of doing things. And I think King was recognizing that is going to work in the same way that like Hobbiton in Lord of the Rings works. Right? Like we talked about how that represents like a certain kind of British, you know, countryside and the old ways. And there's a reason that people find it so homey and comforting. And I think in America, that is this sort of like country living, you know, old school. She doesn't even have running water. She's very tied to the land, and she's very much about like, you know, personal accountability, personal freedom. You know, she doesn't want to be taxed. She votes Republican, all this stuff, right? I don't know. It's an interesting character, and I don't know. What did you think about that Mother Abigail beyond the Gandalf stuff?
Yeah, I mean, you've already talked about it, but to not talk about how offensive that character can be would be obviously doing it ourselves a disservice and everyone listening. Yeah. It's you know, there's problematic for sure.
Because it's othering, right? Like it's saying that she's magical, and it's read the essay, I guess. Like I could go into it more, but I also feel like it's not really for me to say, other than just maybe to point you to someone who can say it better.
Yeah. So anyway, to get to her as a character and what she means to the story, though, you know, like you said, some of her backstory I found to be really compelling. I liked that, like, she, even at her advanced age, was like, you know, everybody's showing up, so she's gonna make this like lavish meal for everyone, and like that was gonna be her sort of like southern.
She is like a really like kindly, likable old woman too, right? Like a lot of that stuff is fun.
Yeah. And I like that she's got attitude too. She's got like a certain agency to her that I think like not many other women characters in the story have. And
she has like a fear of weasels, which is interesting how then it keeps coming up that these weasels are in her dreams and they represent the Dark One.
Yeah, and they all came to attack her basically when she was trying to get this feast together, which was again like a small confrontation between the maybe angel of the story and the devil of the story, or however you want to look at it. And she's like 100-something dealing with like hundreds of weasels apparently, or like a bunch of them come and try to attack her, and she had a fear from when she was a kid, was bitten by one. You know, when she goes off into the woods, I felt like it was a clear moment for me as the reader where King was like, I need to separate her from the rest of the pack for now. And like what did it really accomplish? Just that, to be honest. Like her character motivation to go out there was kind of, it made sense. Like obviously she was like, I need to repent or whatever.
Yeah, it felt like she was going on a vision quest or something. Like
yeah. And then ultimately comes back at the last second, and like all the circumstances that are there and the shining that's going on, the powers and all of it is very interesting. She came back just in time to save everybody from the or you know, some people from the explosion. Her prophecies are probably one of the most interesting things, obviously, too, is like going forward, telling us like some of the things that might happen, and the teaser of like somebody's going to die. Some people are going to be before Randall Flagg, and we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. Someone's going to fall before they reach Las Vegas. Yeah. So what do you expect? I guess is now a good time. What do we think is going to happen? What do you think is going to happen in this third book? Who do you think is going to fall before they reach Las Vegas?
I mean, could be Glenn. We talked about Glenn potentially.
Yeah, so it's
I
Glenn, Ralph, who we haven't talked about. He's kind of a new character. He seems a lot like Stu to me, but maybe even more in the direction of just being like hyper capable in some ways while not being like a book smart kind of guy. He's really likable. So it's Stu, Ralph, Glenn, and Larry are the 4 that are going.
Yeah. So Glenn is a likely candidate. I think we'll probably see somebody more shocking, like I don't know. I could see Stu dying at the end of this, is what I mean. Like Stu has a lot. There's a lot built into his character at this point. Franny's
so him and Frannie have this like going away thing where like she doesn't want him to go, and then he convinces her that he has to, and like they're in love, and he's going to be the father of this child, to help raise it. And
he has the most to lose.
There's a lot of stakes. There's a lot to lose for Stu.
So he seems like a character that would be like a gut punch to kill at the end for a sacrifice or something here at the end for everybody else to live on. That would be a prediction of mine. Kojak is probably just going to be chilling on the porch until he's like
yeah, I think Kojak's done his part now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough because like this is the part of the story.
I love that Kojak fought off 4 fucking wolves. It's so cool. But anyway.
I know, it's awesome. This is the part of the story. Like after reading book 1, I assumed that we were going to get more into this stuff that's coming up in book 3 in book 2. So I was like, I don't know. The things that I did know were like, we're probably going to see these characters come together. We're going to see, I assumed we were going to see more of Mother Abigail and all that kind of stuff. And now we've moved to the point where I'm like, this is the stuff after book 1. I also didn't know like what possibly can happen. They're going to go to Vegas. I don't know what's going to happen along the trip.
And we don't know what's happened with the 3 spies yet. So any thoughts about them? What's going to go on with them?
Exactly. I assume that it's not going to go well. Like, there's going to be conflict here. It's not going to go smoothly. Somebody, I'm sure Tom probably, I don't think that, I don't know, maybe I could see the idea of Tom being this like plant and it working out, but at the same time I feel like it's probably not going to work out that smoothly. He's not going to be able to like infiltrate and get all this information and get out. So I assume some of them are going to be dead, some of them are probably captive. They're going to have to go in and save them, but it seems like they've amassed a pretty massive amount of people, Flagg has, to fight. So 4 people are going to show up. Hopefully some of those initial spies can team up with them and help out. But I genuinely don't know what sort of like cosmic battle we could see, because there's like clearly forces of good and evil versus like the virus stuff, and like what else Flagg could, I know he didn't create the virus. He just like sort of exacerbated a lot of things that went on with it, but like what other things he's capable of we're going to see going forward. So I don't really know where it's going, to be honest. I can't predict much more beyond
and I
that.
feel like it's we're setting you up to look like a fool. Haha, that didn't happen.
You fool.
But I do like that this is once again to make the Lord of the Rings comparisons, right? Like there's talk about heading into the mountain. It feels like they're on their way to Mount Doom. We have multiple parties. We also feel like there's a big battle going to happen.
We got way more out of this Lord of the Rings like comparison than I thought we ever were going to. I thought the comparisons were
and
there.
It's stuff that I completely missed the first time because I had not read Lord of the Rings. I'd watched the films, but there was something about reading the books, and that's definitely where King's drawing on at this point, when he's writing this. So it does feel like, and maybe just we spend so much time thinking about it, like I can't help but make a lot of these comparisons and just think about the ways that he's riffing off of similar ideas while changing it, making it very much his own. It's very cool. Yeah. It's the way that everything that's being made seems like intersects with other things that are being made. And that's just unavoidable. And in fact, I think it's one of the cool things about art is the way they can reflect each other and talk about things that other writers have done.
Well, and like we've said, like people point to Tolkien as like the beginning of all of this, but like there were epic, large scale stories that Tolkien was drawing inspiration from as well. So it's cool to see sort of like that continuation of it with King in his work. And clearly, like you have to love someone's work to emulate it in this way and to kind of do your own thing. So it's kind of like this whole like it's the history of writing and like seeing it evolve over time and seeing these stories like retold in new ways. It's always fun. I think it's historic. I guarantee somebody already has actually taken something that King has created and done a riff on it.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
So I'm realizing that our next episode, however, is not on book 3. We are actually going to start watching the show. We're going to cover the first 5 episodes of the CBS All-Access series, The Stand. And that will be our next episode. So we're going to actually be going back to the beginning here because we don't know how it's going to turn out, but
Yeah, we're not going to know for a little bit. That might be tough for me, but I do want to make some predictions for the show. I think that it's going to be wildly different than the book.
It's
because I don't know
modernized,
how
for one.
it's possible. Yeah, I know almost nothing about this, but I will say one thing that tends to happen with the podcast, just from history, is things that are coming out. If I'm not sort of like accidentally exposed to something, usually it means that it's not like really, really, really gripping the world. So I don't know how well the show is doing right now.
Yeah, well, part of that, I think, and we'll get into this, is like, I don't know how well CBS All-Access is doing. Because you have to sign up for a CBS streaming service to watch this. It's the only way to watch it right now. And I just don't know that has like a future in the streaming world, because I just don't see a lot of people wanting to sign up for that kind of thing. You're not a premium service like HBO.
I know they have Star Trek on there too.
Yeah,
Star Trek is on there, and
that's
like
true.
those are
Star Trek's
like
doing okay, I guess. But again, like, I don't hear a lot of people talking about it because I don't think a lot of people have CBS All Access. But maybe I'm wrong. I'm sure we can get into it. We can talk about how it's doing. Again, we have no guarantee that this show is going to be any good. I've tried to avoid as much as I can. I haven't watched any reviews, read anything. Again, I just saw some outrage coming across the Twitter feed about Trashcan Man in particular. But I mean, that doesn't really surprise me. I guess it does surprise me in the way that, like, I would have hoped that they would have like addressed certain things and modernized it and been smarter. Maybe they do that elsewhere, but apparently they didn't do it with Trashcan Man. So,
but this is all just conjecture at this point. We don't know anything. So we'll be able to report on that come next week. So look forward to that.
Maybe. I think the Trashcan Man episode is like episode 6. I don't know if he is introduced before that, but we actually might not get to it. Anyway, but yeah, we hope that you'll join us for that. If you've been watching all along, we'll react to 5 episodes of TV next week, and it should be a lot, but it should be a lot of fun too. If you liked this episode, please let us know in the form of a rating and review, whatever app you use. That is a good way to help us get the word out.
Like we said earlier in the episode, we are excited about the new changes at Patreon. Definitely check that out if you're interested. Like we said, new art on mugs and t-shirts. I'm super excited about it. Go check those out. Patreon.com/ink2film.
And if you'd like to connect with us, make sure to follow us on social media. We are at Ink2Film on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We also have a Goodreads page, Goodreads group, which you can find. I think it's just Ink2Film Book Club. And join that up, and we have devoted threads to each project we're doing, where people are can interact with each other and discuss.
Yeah, and thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with a TV show. And until next time,
thanks for listening.